say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but what if those intentions were more sinister from the beginning? I'm Nicky P, a resident pop culture expert, here with utopian history expert Danny McCarthy. We're going to take a deeper look at the sci-fi movies that we love and see if maybe what we always thought were warnings were really blueprints. Join us as we pull at the crimson threads in our beloved cinema. Welcome to the road to hell. Today, Dan?
I'm doing very well. How are you, sir?
I'm enjoying this Sunday in the holiday season, and this is a bit of a gift to me that I get to do some talking about stuff again, and I haven't done that in a long while. So, pretty pumped.
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking about movies.
We are. In particular, we're going to be talking about the 1968 original Planet of the Apes, which I was interested to find. And doing my kind of little bit of background research I wanted to do on this was based on a 1930s book. Was it 1930s or 1919s?
Oh, was it that old?
It's pretty old. I was actually pretty interested to note that. I can't remember the guy. Some French guy wrote it.
Yeah, Pierre Boulard or something like that.
And he was he's also the same guy who wrote Bridge Over the River Kwai, which is... To say that these are the two movies that guy two stories that guy came up with was pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, this guy is a classics machine.
Apparently. Honestly, if I remember, I was looking into it, there's some other stuff that, like, I don't know if it became famous or it led to something else that, like, shared names with it, but he had a pretty interesting catalog. Those are just, like, the two most notable.
Mm-hmm.
So, the reason we were getting together is because you are a bit of an expert on, we'll say, the Utopian Project and its history and how people have tried to do that throughout history. And I'm fascinated by that. And I happen to note, like, when I was going through some of your work that you've done, so many parallels that echo things that you see in, like, modern literature and modern, television. Basically things that they're writing in books 100 years ago that they're kind of still harping on and trying to work into culture now via television and movies, things of that nature. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to help kind of get your actual historical work that you've done out to a broader audience by saying, hey, let's talk about shit that people know and care about. So let's talk about movies. And I asked you what you thought would be a good movie to start with, something that's one of your favorites of kind of like the dystopian or utopian society. And you suggested Planet of the Apes, which I was all about. I haven't watched it in a number of years, and it was definitely an experience to go back and see after. I don't think if I watched the original in probably 20 years at this point.
Oh man!
So it was a far more concise and like very simple movie, and I really appreciated like how to its point it got and how quickly. So
yeah.
But what was it about this movie that like you thought it would be a good one to start with?
Well, right off the bat, it is actually one of my very favorite movies. I just think it's a lot of fun. I think there are a lot of great lines. I love the way it's shot, and like you were saying, it is a very concise and simple story. But at its heart, most of the movie is sort of displaying totalitarianism in action, and throughout the whole movie, this totalitarianism on the part of the apes is constantly being justified as like for the greater good, for simian survival. But it's a really simple story. So it doesn't really need to get into all of these small, unimportant details about how a totalitarian society might actually be run. It's just like a very, very sort of one-dimensional portrayal of such a society. So I thought it would be a great introduction for us to do this movie show of ours. I do a little pilot run here with this movie because it's all really cut and dried. There's very little ambiguity to the film other than sort of the twist at the end. Another thing that makes me really get a kick out of this movie. No, go ahead if you wanted to.
Well, no,
chime
it's
in
funny.
there.
It's because it's like I don't know if it's I just know the twist so well because it's such a part of history and media culture, or I don't know that it ever really seemed like a twist to me. And I think that
Yeah.
that's kind of how ingrained the themes of this movie are into our culture at this point. That, well, of course, that's how
It's
this would
like
end.
it's like Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father. No one watching that movie is going to be shocked by it because it's a meme.
Yeah.
And the end of this movie is very much a meme in film. But did you, in the book, actually, the twist is not present. Did you come across that?
No, I did not.
So in the book, we'll spoil the book. I haven't actually read it, but I read a synopsis of it, and it actually ends with. Did you ever see the remake with Mark Wahlberg?
I actually think I saw that one in theaters, believe it or not.
Okay, so that one ends.
It was
He actually,
thereabouts by my teenage years.
I watched that one somewhat recently, and he actually winds up getting transported back to his own time, but everyone's apes. And like there's this weird thing where his timeline crosses with the other one, and it's really ambiguous and it's hard to know what actually happened. Whereas obviously in the original movie, it turns out that he'd been on Earth all along and that the human race had basically wiped itself out.
Mm-hmm.
That twist was the idea of Rod Serling. So for people who don't know, the original script for the Planet of the Apes movie was actually written by Rod Serling, the Twilight Zone guy. And if you think about this movie with that in mind, it becomes very apparent very quickly that this is in fact like Twilight Zone the movie. And I actually wrote down as I was watching the movie, there are at least 4 Twilight Zone episodes, which are basically this movie. Or rather, this movie is a collection of 4 Twilight Zone episodes just smashed into one thing. And I love it because I'm a huge Twilight Zone fan.
But no, I am to actually have the Twilight Zone Christmas specials behind me.
Oh,
So it's now become the largest collection of DVDs I have is my Christmas collection, which just eked out my horror collection this year.
wow. And you did the 100 Days of Horror thing. So that's really saying
It
something.
worked out to be 105 days of horror. but yeah. Well, I think it's no strange coincidence, obviously, Rod Serling. I don't remember much about Rod's past, but you look at that time period and you look at the writing, you look at the themes, and to me, it boils down to this one book called Silent Spring that in the environmental movement like took over. It was everyone worships this book because it was the thing that I guess in the modern culture became the beacon of where we need to go as a people, which is we need to wipe ourselves out. Mm-hmm. Or more importantly, everything that we do inevitably is going to wipe us out. To me, the big core of this movie, and it was you could have put a billboard up in the background of every scene that said humanity is evil and extinction is its only like future. And it couldn't have been any more obvious. And it was just, to me, it was interesting how that was such a prevalent idea here. Like within the first few seconds of the movie, you have Taylor complaining about humanity and like wishing humanity was better. Like right there in the opener, he's sitting there smoking a cigar, thinking, "Oh man, wonder what those evil bastards in the world are going to be like when I get back there." You know. Have they given up on all the crap that they were doing 250 years ago or whatever it was that they were supposed to be going back to? And so it's no big surprise that the view of humanity in this movie is not exactly ideal.
Right. So, I mean, probably everyone's seen this movie, but just for people who might not know, it opens up with 4 people in a spacecraft traveling somewhere in deep space near the speed of light. And the theory is that as you travel towards the speed of light, you'll sort of bend time and space. So while, I don't know, maybe at that point, 6 or 8 months had passed for the people on the ship, maybe 200 or 300 years had passed for actual Earth. And so they were going to basically travel time and then return to Earth and do some sciencey thing. It's kind of the science and actually what their goal is very ambiguous. I think it's supposed to just be sort of stock sci-fi basis.
Well, there's something a nugget in there even that I really appreciate because you have to think what kind of a person is willing to go and be the guinea pig of that kind of experiment.
Hmm.
Like, what do you have to think of humanity to be willing to just leave it all behind and know that everything that you know, love, and appreciate that's here will be gone when you get back?
Yeah, and there's a great breakdown of that idea. So something goes wrong with the ship. They crash land on what they think is a distant planet somewhere in the constellation of Orion. And unfortunately, the one female who was supposed to be their sort of brood mare, wherever they wound up, she died. And so it's just these three dudes, and they're on this planet stranded. And Taylor, the captain, played by Charlton Heston, he's sort of he's this like post 60s cynical idealist, right? I think there's no coincidence that this movie came out when it did in 68 because he sort of embodied the begrudging, angry, hate the world post hippie
Mm-hmm.
archetype. You know what I mean? Like, do you ever run into an old hippie now? Like someone who was a hippie back in the day and still is? They are some of the most upset, jaded people you will ever encounter. At least that's been my
Where do we
experience.
find these kind of people out of curiosity?
Art fairs.
Art fairs.
Art fairs. Yeah, there's we were Alice and I years ago. We're at this art fair in Cleveland, and we ran into some of these dudes still wearing the tie dye, still got the ponytail, but it's all white, bald on top, and they're just the angriest dudes. They're so cynical, and the Heston character Taylor in this movie reminded me of that because he's got these lofty ideals for man. You know, he thinks human beings should be peaceful and treat each other equally and stuff, but he's observed the human race for long enough and it doesn't meet his standards, right? So he's kind of got this pompous arrogance to him where he thinks he's in a position to judge all of humanity and he judges it wanting, you know?
Which is so funny because he has so much in common with what you would classify as the main villain of the movie.
Hmm.
And what is the last line that the villain says to him right before the last line he says about him? Where's he going? Going to go, and he's going to go his destiny.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So there's this arc in the movie where Taylor starts off being very cynical and very hateful almost towards humanity. And you asked why someone would want to basically time travel and leave everything they ever cared about behind. In his case, his motivation is because the human race sucks and he doesn't like anybody and he doesn't like anything. And so he starts off like that. But then over the course of the movie, as he winds up in this ape world, kind of towards the end, he develops, well, he wants to defend humanity, right? He wants the humans to have been better than the apes. But then, of course, that dream is squashed at the end when he realizes that the humans were the big screw ups all along.
Well, and I'm I would say new world atheist myself. Like I'm not someone who falls into the religious side of things. Born Catholic and has kind of walked away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a note that he makes when the head of the science in this world of the ape world is also the minister of the church. Like he's in charge of keeping track of all of the church records and keeping those in line with science, or more importantly, keeping the science in line with, when the scientists in the movie finally prove to him that, oh, humanity was here first, and there's that moment where it's like, well, no shit, and I'm supposed to keep the apes from knowing that, because if you went and saw what he's about to see and understood it, there's only one place that being human can go. Like, we have to
Yep.
keep ourselves from becoming human. Now, does it require a tyrannical world to make that keep that from happening? This is the only thing that I could think could detract from was probably the intended purpose of the movie, is that it seems like no matter who you are, being the leader of society is going to inevitably end up with a shitty society where violence and caste systems and taking advantage of each other are the norm, because that's all
Yes.
still around.
Well, right. Okay. So this is what I think is maybe the secret, like esoteric implication of the movie, which is also what leads me to think that maybe it's not so much like just bland old anti-human propaganda shit, but actually maybe a cautionary tale in general. The real moral is perhaps that this is where tyranny leads you. The human beings wound up destroying themselves because they got so wrapped up in their pursuit of technology and dominance that, I mean, look at the ape society. It has a class system based on race. You know, the orangutans are this, the chimps are that, the gorillas are that. They're separated into a caste system. Their society is built on lies, and their whole justification is painting the human being as the enemy. But to do that, they're enacting the same very worst traits of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's like, are humans the bad guys, or is this sort of, I mean, for lack of a better word, statism? Is that actually the enemy of this movie?
Or we could even take that a step further. It's society itself,
Right.
the
Yeah.
bad guy. The minute
Right.
people start organizing, immediately this is the inevitability of that. Is that what they want us to believe? Because it does seem like if you follow the people that would classify the authoritarians, it always seems like that they're hell bent on destruction. Like they want to destroy what is human and what is here.
Yeah. They want to destroy the best things about themselves. And so the apes, they focus on all of humankind's worst traits, which, all right, sure, I can buy that humans have bad traits. I mean, there's never anything that's 100% positive. But what they don't acknowledge, and I think maybe the movie is trying to get people who are of that anti human mindset to see, is that this is just what happens when any creature would get together and try to hold up some grand narrative. It's going to wind up oppressing itself and maybe eventually destroying itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth noting that, you know, in the movie, the ape society is sort of this like grungy medieval stone agey looking place. You know, like all the buildings are made of clay and they swing clubs around and stuff. It's very primitive. In the original script by Rod Serling, the ape society was actually like modern 60s America. The apes would walk around in fedoras and they can go to the movies and stuff. It was supposed to be an exact parallel to modern human society. And the only reason they didn't go with that is budget reasons. So that's why they built up like the goofy caveman looking ape city. But
Yeah.
in the original script, it was supposed to be more obviously a parallel that the apes were on the exact same evolutionary trajectory
Well, see,
as humankind.
I almost would have questioned whether or not that was deliberate as a way of showing that the apes are inevitably more in touch with nature, and that even as their society evolved, they never left nature behind, because that's what human beings do. Human beings have no respect for nature, and everything we do is to get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
that's actually that's what I would have saw out of that.
well, right. When I actually just watched the movie last night because I wanted it fresh in my head, and that's how I like justify the ape society in my own little head canon. I'm like, oh well, this is why it looks this way in universe because they're apes and they're supposed to be more in touch. But knowing like beyond the fourth wall that it was really just a budgetary thing, and in the actual script, the message that Serling had in mind, because like I said before, it was him who came up with the idea of having the twist be that he was on Earth all along, that the humans destroyed themselves. That was his whole thing. But it was also his thing that it would be a modern.
Hold on, you cut
Oh,
off.
sorry.
You cut out. You cut out there for a little bit.
All right. Is that better?
No, no, you're fine. It was you literally just like a split second. You cut out for us. Didn't want to lose anything.
Oh, okay. No, so I was just saying that it was Serling who came up with the twist at the end, but it was also him who came up with the whole lead up to that twist being the apes in a modern society. And so I wonder if some of the impact from his ending was perhaps lost or obscured in the changing of the set of the ape society. You know what I mean? Like it could just be that the differences between the humans and the apes in the movie are exacerbated by the difference in their setting. Whereas in the original story, it wasn't necessarily supposed to be that way.
Interesting. Like I would almost read it as it makes it more poignant, because it's like the closer you get to humanity, the worse things become. And so, I mean, there was definitely within their their culture staying the hell away from being human in any way they could, and keeping human beings, frankly, away from them. Like they they didn't play nice with humans. The only reason they were ever around in the first place to even bother capturing them, other than just killing them, was because you had some of those chimps that wanted to experiment on them and thought maybe we could learn something about them by cutting them open. That
Right.
was literally the only reason that they were tolerated, because Zayas, like, the only good humans are a cut open human, basically. Which is also, amusing because as the keeper of the word, he's also apparently very aware throughout the whole movie that, yeah, of course humanity was an advanced civilization prior to the apes, and look what they did. Like,
Yes.
you maniacs.
There's some definite nod to the idea of there being an esoteric history to the planet, lost civilization stuff. And I think it amuses me because nowadays with the internet, there are so many circles of people who are talking about, like, there was a lost civilization here on Earth 10,000, 12,000 years ago or whatever. And who really built the pyramids and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that people will often point to is how, for instance, Egyptian civilization, like, the older you go, the farther back you go, the more advanced it seems to be. So rather than that society following a progressive trajectory, it actually seems to follow a degenerative trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that is said at the end of this movie when, at the very end, Cornelius, who's one of the scientist chimps, who's sort of like he's a timid renegade. He doesn't want to go against the flow, but his ideas lead him there anyway. He goes out to this archaeological dig site where he found human artifacts. And he says that, I noticed that the further I dig, the deeper I go, the more complex the technology seems to be. And at the deepest levels, I find human remains. So implying that there was, in fact, a lost civilization of human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this is what Dr. Zaius reacts against.
Yeah, he's like, there's no, like, if the apes ever do this, like, this would be destroy our entire civilization. Which, like I said, it's not without obvious reasons why you'd have the head of your science also be the head of your religion, because you kind of, which, if we look through history, look at how much of science has been controlled by, say, the Catholic Church or the Arab Church in that part of the world. Religion has always had its finger on the direction and speed and how science has moved throughout history. So it's not even like that's almost not a, what do I want to say here? It's not even, almost not allegorical. It's almost historic that would be that way.
Sure. Well, and in the movie makes it really easy for the audience because the different types of apes exclusively occupy different social positions. And so the religious and scientific leaders, the orangutans, they also happen to be the entire political class, right? So
Yeah.
there's science, religion, and politics all in one. And it's funny how it's the actual chimpanzees who do the real scientific experimentation. Like, they're the ones doing the work, but the ones who are supposed to interpret it are the orangutans. Yeah. And that would be Dr. Zaius, who I think the best scene of him, there are a lot of good scenes with him because he's like the perfect tyrant type of guy. But when Taylor, he gets shot in the neck, and so he can't speak. And this is part of why he's wrapped up in this whole, is he or isn't he a intelligent being debacle that takes like the first, I don't know, half of the movie to unravel. But when he finally heals,
bright eyes, as they call
bright
it,
eyes,
because it looks like he's thinking. It's almost like he knows what we're doing.
And when he finally heals, he's got the wonderful line, "Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape." And that's how he reveals that he can speak, and everyone goes ape shit over it, pun intended. But when he finally is able to sit down with Cornelius and Zira, his two allies in the chimp world, they're in the ape world, they're the good ones, right? They're willing to hear him out.
Are they good, or are they the ones that put science above religion? Because, I mean, she's been cutting up apes or cutting up human beings for a long while, and the only thing that's interesting about this one is he can talk.
That's true. That is
Like,
true.
I don't know that that's necessarily good, or if it's just, well, she entertains a particular interest in this one. I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
you even get to the end of the point where he's like, I want to kiss you, and she's like, yeah, but you're so damn ugly. Like,
All
she
right.
still sees him as a dirty animal.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it this way then. Maybe they're not good, but they're the best. Like for the interests of our character's
Yeah.
survival, they are the best. They become his confederates. And I would argue that, especially Zira, like maybe there is a sort of character development in them where maybe they begin to see that humans aren't so bad,
Well, I
like they
think
were
it's
sort of
it,
conditioned from a young age.
there's something special at the very least about this one, and that
Mm-hmm.
maybe there is more to them than we know. But
Right.
the conditioning is still the conditioning, and you can only go so far so fast with that.
Sure. Well, and even their scientific opinion about Taylor and why he is so intelligent is that he's a mutant.
Yeah.
So he tells them when he gets his voice back, he says, "Look, I came here in a craft that sails across the sky and fell from the sky and blah, blah, blah." And of course, they don't believe him
None of that's
because
possible.
in their world, air traffic, any sort of space travel is totally impossible. And as they're barking at him about how this is a complete scientific impossibility, he's sitting there fiddling with a piece of paper. He makes a paper airplane. And as they're still talking about how flight is impossible, he just throws his little paper airplane across the room and it sails in the air and then falls down and they're just dumbstruck. And I love that scene because
Yeah.
it's funny, but it's also just illustrative of how experimentation can destroy what people hold dear. But the best part of that scene is then after he demonstrates the flight of the airplane, Dr. Zaius comes in. And Cornelius and Zira are like, "Doctor, try out this thing that he made to see what it does. It flies on the air." And he doesn't do it. He just crumples it up and says, "Nonsense," and throws it in the garbage.
Doesn't even care.
Right.
But what I think when you find out is that at the end of it, there's nothing here that he probably really didn't know. It's just his job is to keep the apes from walking down that path, to keep them from becoming human, because inherently in being human is your own self destruction.
But he's wrong. I think in my
I would
utopian
agree as well.
analysis, right? Like your pursuit of preserving whatever you think is the ideal type of society is exactly the thing that's going to lead you to your own destruction. In trying not to be humans, you're going to become the worst type of humans, that is totalitarian statists.
So there were a few like Easter eggy kind of things that pointed out to you before the beginning of this. When the big kind of turning point in what the narrative is in this is actually where they, what do you call it, where they have their trial, and they're not letting him speak. It's really funny. It's like, well, he's not an ape. Non-apes don't have rights. Like, so why are we even bothering with this?
Right.
And he's not allowed to talk. He's not allowed to defend himself. Like, they have to have the apes speak for him. Like, they make him the whole show trial. But to me, the trial almost seemed to be allegorical for Darwinism, for this idea of evolution. And it was almost like evolution itself was on trial here. And this would be something I'd look to you for, because I know that you have the receipts, say, historically about the big players, we'll say, in the utopian movement. It almost seemed like a nod to, like, we were right all along. It kind of slipped into the movie as a reference to, like, say, Darwinism and his role in its writings and its role within the greater utopian project.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Scopes monkey trial?
A little bit of it.
So I think that was probably at least nodded to in this scene because obviously apes monkey
missing
trial.
link,
It's
right?
clear, but for most of the movie, assuming pretending it's 1968 and you're in the movie theater and you don't have the meme baggage of the ending of this movie that we all have going into it, and you don't know what the ending is, the movie is telling you throughout the whole thing that he just somehow landed on another world where the evolutionary lineage is flip-flopped, right? So apes evolved from humans. Whereas here on Earth, humans evolved from apes or whatever. You don't know that it's actually the same planet all along.
Hmm.
So I think that you're right, that it's supposed to be a sort of victory lap for evolution, in that it's just demonstrating that evolution can take all kinds of different forms, but it's also saying that, and it's raising the question probably about animal rights.
Hmm.
If in fact apes do come from humans, or if humans come from apes, what does that mean about how we should treat our so-called evolutionary progenitors?
Hmm.
So and this is what, if you've seen the newer Planet of the Apes movies, specifically the first of the new trilogy, it there's a lot of that to this. Like, how should we be treating chimpanzees if they're this close to us intellectually and evolutionarily? We need to rethink about our relationship with these other
So
species.
the moral of the story is don't shoot Harambe.
The moral of the story is don't shoot Harambe, don't capture Harambe, and maybe even don't teach Coco how to sign language. Because, captivity is, would you do it to a human? If not, then you shouldn't do it to an ape, is I think a push for in the newer ones. But in the older one, in the original one, I think that there are a lot of different parallels going on.
Hmm.
Because on the one hand, it is very obviously just a display of a totalitarian state. I mean, they strip him naked before he's allowed to present his case, which even then they don't listen to. And the court, they do this wonderful thing where Taylor asserts his own intellectual autonomy, that he is a thinking creature, that he has the ability to reason on his own. And the prosecutor chuckles and says, "Oh, if you can reason, then tell me, what's the second commandment of our ape law?" You
Rote
know,
memorization. Because you
right?
don't have rote memorization, you can't reason with one having
Yeah.
nothing to do with the other.
And he says, "Look, I don't know your culture." And so the guy cuts him off. Of course, you don't know our culture. You can't think. So it becomes this beautiful demonstration of circular logic, which, the movie is about two different species, but it could be about any totalitarian society throughout
Hmm.
history. That's the way it goes.
Well, there's the classic line where Heston's character Taylor, where he says in the middle of the court trial as he's watching, his defenders just be run over by the orangutans. He's like, well, clearly some apes are more equal than other,
Yes.
which obviously is a nod to another writer of the
Right,
time.
right. Yeah,
So
well, and go ahead.
no, no, you're good.
Well, I was just going to say it speaks to the the delineation in the movie between the humans and the apes. It takes a back seat because the ruling class in the ape society is perfectly willing to destroy Zira and Cornelius as well. So
Hmm.
they're sort of, it's not like they hold necessarily any sort of special favor for apes. They're willing to cut down anybody who gets
Hmm.
in the way of, the ape narrative, even if it means destroying their own. I don't remember the exact charge that they leveled at. Actually, no, I have it written down. They charged Cornelius and Zira with scientific heresy,
Yeah.
which sounds like it's probably a pretty heavy charge, considering that they're willing to then like do this whole jailbreak thing
Well,
and escape.
which is also amusing because heresy isn't a scientific term; it's a religious term.
Yeah, of course.
We're in a world where science and religion are equally wrapped up in each other. Like heresy is something that you do against the church.
Hmm.
What is it if it's against the government? It's what's the term for that?
Oh, treason?
Treason. Yeah,
Yeah,
treason if
yeah.
it's against the government. But no, they've created heresy, which is not lost on anyone. I think.
No, especially these days. I mean, you tack the adjective scientific in front of heresy, and it sounds like it would be a paradoxical concept, and indeed it is. And yet, people seem to act out its existence constantly. There are certain scientific dogmas that are not allowed to be questioned.
I mean, I don't want to say that if you made uh, Dr. Zayas a white haired man with a mousy face and some thin rimmed glasses, that you couldn't hear him saying, I am the science. But
All I'll
it
say
goes
is at
without
the
saying.
at the end of the trial scene, when Dr. Zayas says take him away, when they drag Taylor out, they do force a mask on his face. But
That was also not lost on me.
yeah, that did jump out at me. So, oh
Well, I mean,
shit.
that's the first thing any totalitarian regime does, or any regime bent on cultivating knowledge to a very specific end. That you're going to silence the people that need silenced. So it's no question that like there's a symbolic meaning behind masks.
Mhm.
Like you question anyone who questions this, you put the mask on. That's where your place is. Your place is to be silent and just let it happen.
Right. And also it's like there, if you want to get kind of weird about it, I think that there's even a sort of maybe a subconscious meaning to it, in that it's also restricting your breathing. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
not fatally, but symbolically and literally to an extent. It's actually like somebody else is asserting control over your ability to suck in air.
Yeah,
And that to me is like a very fundamental and egregious sin, for lack of a better
yeah,
word, especially considering, the word spirit comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means breath. And so it's like a sort of quote unquote spiritual assault. I don't mean to get into like woo woo shit. I just think it's an
no. I
interesting
mean,
linguistic thing.
as somebody who's studied linguistics, I know it's never beyond me what words are actually mean and where they're from.
Yeah.
Because put it this way, the people that we are kind of leveling the series at, they're certainly not above changing the meanings of words at a whim for their end goal. So I think paying attention to linguistics and how that evolves is absolutely very important to kind of understanding where things have come from, where they're going, and how much of it might be part of a greater plan or part of a greater ideology.
I totally agree with that. 100%. And on the subject of language, I wonder how many people realized or were annoyed by the fact that, as great as this movie is, why the hell do the apes speak English? And why the hell does Taylor not say, huh, why do I understand these apes?
I mean, to me, that seems like the absolute glaring element of this, that
Yes.
like that they would have ended up with the same, all of the same stuff in here. I mean, people
Mm-hmm.
across the world don't even speak like each other. Like, why didn't they speak German? Why
Right.
didn't they speak any kind of one of the African languages? Like, they speak in cliques and shit.
This is supposed to be 2,000 years after Taylor's own time, and they all just speak perfect modern 60s style English. It's
Yeah,
the biggest plot hole you can
you're just
imagine.
kind of waiting for one of those like, yeah, one like. I mean, listen, what is it? If nothing else, the best part I think of the movie is absolutely the teenage kid that suddenly pops up at the end
Right.
of the movie, who totally talks like any teenage kid of the era. And Charlton Heston gives him a speech about never trust anybody over 30, kid.
Uh huh. Yeah. There he is again, our post 60s cynic.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, let's be honest. That's still something that they're trying to really level kids today. That generational warfare, that idea of don't trust anybody because they're just trying to hold forward motion of society back. And you want to keep moving. You want to keep that progress rolling.
Yes. Yeah, there are no good adults. There are no impressive adults in the movie. Dr. Zaius is an ass. Cornelius is
Pussy.
weak. He's a pussy. Okay, like Zira, maybe. Zira might be the best in that she at least she's brave, right? She's courageous. She does, I think, show some compassion in the end towards humans. Like
Yeah.
I would be willing to accept that her character maybe changed
Yeah.
over the course of knowing humans. And that's great. But aside from her, there are no good adults. They're all a bunch of bumbling morons. Even Taylor, like he's this man of power, which is cool, but not at any point in the movie is he concerned with the liberation of the other people. He's only concerned with his own freedom. You
Yeah.
know, he's not like, oh, we need to get these people out of here.
He steals that one woman, so he's gonna get what he needs and just
Yeah.
rides off into the sunset.
Yeah, he's not a hero at
But
all.
but once again, I would argue that kind of goes towards the end. The moral of the story really is that yeah, he's human. He's selfish because he didn't think of anyone else. He didn't think about trying to break up the entire ape civilization and show them what they did. Like he wasn't interested in that. Like yeah, if you guys want to go and utilize this information from this cave to shake up your society, have at it. I just want to get the hell away from you.
Exactly.
I want to pursue my best life.
He doesn't say a single word about is it wrong to imprison human beings or anything like that. And I kind of even get the impression that if the character were to be asked, he would probably express disdain for
I'm
the
not
other
one of them.
humans, you know?
They're
Right.
not
Like,
me.
yeah, they probably deserve to be locked up.
Well, I mean, he actually does say as much. He's like, well, back on Earth, I had all the women you could want, and well, I guess you're the closest thing I'm gonna find to that here.
Oh, right. Yeah. What does he say? He
It's
said,
just so dismissive of what's her name there,
uh,
Nova.
Nova, yeah. You're the only girl in town.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I mean, just like,
It's like, damn, I hope she can't understand you, dude.
I mean, no, if you're gonna get stuck with a woman who can't speak, and in April, I mean, you could do worse, but still, uh,
Yeah.
it's like I said, it's definitely not without me that there was a certain perspective of humanity that they were trying to paint, and
Mhm.
in the most ham-fisted way I think they could, they did.
Yes. Well, and so after the trial, there's a really important thing that happens. So Taylor is basically condemned, and the what they're going to do to him is actually cut his nuts off. That's
Absolutely,
that's what he's charged with is nut
that's right.
removal.
That's right. We are in the. Well, that's where they're gonna start.
Right, yeah, and then they're going to poke and prod in his brain while he's still alive, and just try to figure out what the hell his deal is.
Yeah.
So Dr. Zaius brings him into his office and essentially admits to Taylor that he knows that the whole story about him being some scientific fabrication of Cornelius and Zira, which is what the prosecutor had claimed, that was bunk. He knows that he's naturally the way he is. He doesn't quite believe Taylor's story about coming from outer space, but he is concerned with, or rather,
There
he
being more of
believes.
them.
Yes, right. He thinks that there could be more like him, admitting that humanity actually does have the potential to be intelligent. He just thinks it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
So he offers Taylor a way out. He says, if you just admit to my narrative that the humans are below the apes in the social pecking order, and then show us where you come from, I'll let you off the hook. But of course, Taylor can't do that. And it's a wonderful scene because as Taylor gets dragged out of Dr. Zaius's office, he's screaming, you could cut me and poke and prod me and do whatever, doctor, but just remember, you do it because you're afraid of me. What are you afraid of, doctor? And he's calling out the fear of the totalitarian.
Well, what's more, so, I mean, if he now I don't blame him for not trusting Dr. Zaius, but in that moment he could have everything he wants if he just said screw it, have some humility and just pretend, oh yeah, no, totally, yeah, you guys are totally greater than us. Now I'm gonna go off in the woods and do my thing. Now I don't for a minute think Zaius would have let that happen, but he could have gotten everything he wanted right there. His pride, which is one of the great sins of man, as they'll make you believe in this, prevents him from, like, you have a whole other third of the movie because his pride keeps him from getting what he wants.
Yes.
It prevents him from taking it because he'd have to choke on himself.
Right. He does not want to admit that he is a missing link between, some pre-ape being and the apes themselves. He doesn't want to admit his inferiority. And he's like, he doesn't want to admit that his story is just a story. Like he seems like the kind of guy who demands to be believed.
Yeah.
He's like I said, he's a man of power. That's his motivating factor is his own power, because he's got no other reason, as he makes evident from his speech at the beginning of the movie. He's never really found anybody else worthy of respect.
Yeah.
So all he has is himself.
And from our perspective, I mean, God, how much of him is exactly the same as Isaiah's, and how many times is culture pushed at the whims of one of these people running into another person? It's like nations are led by these immovable forces and rise and fall as they, the people in charge of them do.
Right. Yeah, that's really the conflict of the movie, is Taylor butting heads with Zaius. And you're right that he could have just slinked out of it, but I like your analogy to these two characters as sorts of being the immovable forces that are states that we experience now,
Hmm.
where, the two dictators, neither of them wants to bend. And so this is what winds up destroying lives. I
I
mean,
mean, look at what ends up like all of this. What does it bring down on Zira and what's his name there, the other one,
Cornelius.
Cornelius?
Yeah.
Like he could have just walked away from all this. Their lives would have been better. They would have never
Hmm.
had to deal with the heresy crap. There would have never been all the violence in town. Like he just could have just left in the middle of the night. It could have been a non thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But the needs of these two men to push against each other, on the Dr. Zaya society, and he's willing to add antagonism and violence more so than there already was into his society to prove he's right. And Taylor's willing to not give a shit about anything but himself to prove he's right. These,
Exactly.
yeah, it's
To the detriment of Cornelius and Zira, who, like, if you just look at them for who they are, they were the only people that ever helped out Taylor, so he's in debt to them, but he screws them over. And also Dr. Zaius, like, these are possibly the two best and smartest scientists you have. Like, think of what assets they could be to your society, but he's also willing to grind them into dust because they went against him. And also at the very end, if you caught it, Dr. Zaius also brings in the kid, Lucius, into his charge. Like, he's in trouble too. The
yeah.
kid who Heston was just saying, don't trust anyone over 30. Well, he shouldn't have trusted you, dude,
Yeah.
because you just got him wrapped up into your bull crap. You just ruined this kid's life.
Well, he says it enough. He's like, just another adult, man.
Uh-huh. Yeah, right. He's his dialogue, the kid's dialogue is pretty rough. I mean, it's
Well, but it's honestly it's one of my favorite parts of the movie because it's so glaringly of that time that
yeah,
like which I think would be what would be if you had kids like in this world because that's the thing that this is very the cast is pretty slim in what you need and you only see kind of like the adult parts of society. Like this would be only if you were ever out in the work environment and you didn't have to think about how these people actually lived beyond that, what are family structures and things like.
mhm.
And so this kid is just like the only view we get of the society beyond like the adult machinations of it. And it's just so much a kid thing. It's like, yeah, the hell with you, buddy.
Right.
Who are you? You're not my mom. You're not my dad.
Yes, exactly. It's very funny. And he like repeats all the stock lines, like, you can't trust the older generation.
Yeah.
He just says things like that, and it's amusing. And he winds up kind of being right. Because when the older generation are cynics like Taylor and authoritarians like Dr. Zaius, yeah, you kind of shouldn't trust those people because they only care about themselves.
Well, and I would actually argue that that's representative of, say, I think what you will ultimately we're going to come to, whatever we're trying to find in the middle of this project, is the great paradox, is that you were talking about people who want to control the lives of everyone else because they believe they have the right way to live, they have the right way that society is supposed to be, and to a degree, are we any different than them? In what we would suggest. Maybe we have a different way that we believe the world should be run, but given the ability to be dictators, to keep them from getting control, do we pick up that mantle ourselves and try and lead the way? Because
Right.
it's so much of what they say, it's like you just want to see, God, if I was in charge, we'd fix all this.
Hmm.
And there is a natural human, a natural human desire to do that. I think you and I would suggest, well, no, the real thing is to perhaps not fight our human nature, but embrace the fact that we are human and can make decisions. To choose not to do that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I don't believe necessarily in these sorts of inevitablist arguments about human nature because it's always presented through a certain limiting lens. Like, the human capacity to make decisions is always looked at through the capacity of states and big corporations and stuff to make decisions. Just like the human being's capacity to discover truth is always filtered through the lens of either religion or established dogmatic science.
yeah,
The any given scientist or scientific organization or religion's ability to create some sort of logical deduction about what is has virtually no bearing on my ability to go out into my backyard and to do experiments in agriculture. Like it's separate. But these decision making processes are always looked at in their largest, most macro expression. And so in this movie, we see that the human being's ability to make decisions basically is reduced to the human race's maximum capacity for destruction. But the reality is that only when human beings have assembled themselves into these gigantic artificial social constructions is that ability to destroy themselves actually even possible.
It's always, well, what do we do? What would we do about, nukes?
Right, exactly.
And I'm like, well, who's going to have the money to afford maintenance of nukes? Like, unless you're robbing an entire population blind in an effort to afford them, nobody would. Like,
Yeah.
it would severely limit, what kind of science you could do in that regard. The only reason anyone would have that, I imagine that it would immediately become more profitable to take all of that plutonium or whatever it is that we use nowadays and go and turn it into energy than it would be to blow it up. I mean, it's literally destruction of things. There's no money in that unless you're using it as a cudgel to force people. And once again, even that's not a great way to do things. It's like a last resort for most nations.
Right. Well, and I agree with that. And especially nowadays, it's easier to see that. I appreciate that this movie is an artifact of the Cold War. I don't think that you could really make this particular movie today. You could make a Planet of the Apes movie today, but you couldn't. The nuke ending would definitely not have the same impact it would have had in '68. And I think that's why the newer trilogy.
It's kind of charming, that ending now, because this is
yeah.
what they thought was going to happen.
Right. Yeah, it's almost a relief. You're like, oh, good, we're not there. Cool. But nowadays, when they make the Planet of the Apes movies, what are they about? They're about a man-made pathogen that escapes and kills all of humanity and gives the apes intelligence. Have you seen any of the new ones?
I haven't watched the newest one.
Okay,
because there are that came out. Yeah, I know I watched the ones back in like the late '90s, early 2000s. I want to say like maybe it was one like 2005. I think was the last thing I would have seen.
Okay, yeah, They made a new trilogy, and I think it's like it started in 2009. I want to say,
and I don't think I've watched any of those ones. I thought about going back and revisiting them. For this, maybe we'll just make a whole episode out of like watching that series or something.
I would recommend those three. I actually find them enjoyable movies, but they definitely they shift the focus. It's a complete reboot of the narrative that we get in the original, but it's about a man-made pathogen essentially that makes apes intelligent, but has deleterious effects on the human being.
Yeah, everything is man-made pathogens past a certain point. That's what they all go with. Well, at some point, I'll actually have you watch that show Utopia.
Yeah, we should do that,
because that one, you're gonna literally, some of the names that they drop within the show, like you're gonna be in tears on the floor, like, oh my god, I can't believe they said that.
Wow, yeah, I look forward to that. It's been on my list for a while, so maybe we could do an episode or a few on that.
When they start bringing George Bernard Shaw like sayings into stuff, and you're just like, what? So, all right. Well, I think we've kind of hit the nail on the head of what we were trying to get out of this movie. What do you think?
I think so. I'm looking through. I've got a whole ton of notes, way too many. But I could read, if it's interesting. There are a couple things that Dr. Zaius says at the very end of the movie, where he's quoting from their sacred scrolls or whatever the hell they call their Bible. And it's just how the apes view man. And it has to be remembered that at this point, Taylor is at his most pro-human that he is in the movie.
Yeah.
He's just been vindicated that human beings were there, that their technological capacity was greater than the apes was. And so I think to him and his sort of like just only go forward mindset, this is a victory for him, that we're smarter, we're better than you. And Dr. Zaius even says, if humans are so great, then why are they gone? And Taylor, who at the beginning of the movie was talking about how man makes war against his brother and all this stuff, the only explanation he can come up with for Dr. Zaius is, oh, it must have been some sort of natural catastrophe. There was a plague or maybe a meteor strike or something. Um, it doesn't even enter into his mind that maybe it was the damn nukes. So Dr. Zaius says, let's see, beware the beast man, for he is the devil's pawn. Alone among God's primates, he kills for sport or lust or greed. Yea, he will murder his brother to possess his brother's land. Let him not breed in great numbers, for he will make a desert of his home and yours. Shun him, drive him back into the jungle, for his is the harbinger, or for he is the harbinger of death. And then cutting a little bit further, he says, let's see, Dr. Zaius is always, oh, okay, so this is where he's saying that he knows more than he's ever let on about man. So Dr. Zaius says of the human race, his wisdom must walk hand in hand with his idiocy. His emotions must rule his brain. He must be a warlike creature who gives battle to everything around him, even himself. The Forbidden Zone was once a paradise. Your breed, Taylor's breed, made a desert of it ages ago. So he knows that the Forbidden Zone, which is where this archaeological stuff was, that it used to be wonderful, like Eden. It was a garden paradise, but human beings turned it into a desert. And so if you're paying attention as a 1968 viewer of this movie, you're going to see where the movie ends, you know?
Yeah.
So I appreciated that.
Well, like I said, there's so much in there, like, because you're kind of, they set it up for him to ride off into the sunset. He's got the girl, he's got supplies, and he's just gonna go be happy. And they steal that moment from him the minute Zay says, "What's he going? His destiny. Well, what's his destiny? It's the destiny of all man.
Yep.
Destruction. Its own destruction, at its own hands."
So for those of you listening who don't know, I can't imagine anyone doesn't know. And, you know, it's a great movie. I love this movie, so I would recommend watching it. And as you've said to me before, if it's really good, you can know the ending and it'll still be good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like spoiler, yeah, the fear of spoilers is kind of dumb. But it ends with him riding along the beach, and you just see like the strange gnarled metal at the bottom of the screen. You know, oh, what is that? And then they show more metal. Like, oh, what is that? And then he gets off his horse and he falls into the sand and he says, "You really did it. You maniacs. You blew it up. Damn you all to hell." And then the camera zooms out and it reveals the Statue of Liberty.
Half buried Statue of Liberty.
He was home all along. Human beings had nuked themselves into oblivion.
It would have been essentially in 2,500 years.
Yeah.
Because that's what the last thing he saw, or it was like 2,500 years in the future, whatever. Or maybe it was just the year 2,500, so maybe it's only 500 years in the future.
I wrote it down, actually. He said, hold on. At the very beginning, when they get out of the ship, they are in the year 3978.
Okay.
So it's been about 2,000 years.
Okay. So in 2,000 years, humanity completely destroyed itself. And nature did what nature does. It evolved and something else took over.
Apes became intelligent and also experienced a tremendous amount of physical degradation. That's one thing that stood out to me, along with the English speaking in the movie, is, you know, a chimpanzee could rip any bodybuilder's arms off, no problem. But in this movie, you got little Charlton Heston friggin' kicking gorillas in the face, and they go flying down the steps and stuff. So I guess there was some sort of trade-off in brain size versus muscles.
But like we would imagine that any culture that starts to pay attention to brains over brawn, that would be an inevitability. Mm-hmm. You know, you're not going to spend all your time swinging from trees when you start reading books.
Exactly.
I mean, how would we have fared against the caveman of our own history?
Oh yeah,
probably could have ripped us from limb because they had to fight animals barehanded.
100%. Yeah, we're very weak, but we become tool users, and that's what happened with the apes. Like they ride horses, they carry guns, and there's a question in the movie: is how much of their actual technological development is their own creation, and how
Yeah.
much of it did they just sort of reassemble what the humans had left them.
Yeah.
And I would, given the basis of their scientific dogmatism and how Dr. Zaius is completely unwilling to consider alternative points of view, I'd imagine probably a great deal of it was just sort of found by the
Yeah.
apes, and they didn't actually figure much of it out.
And they took ownership of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they got to decide which of it they'd keep and which of it they'd get rid of.
Right.
Because, I mean, that's a whole lot of scientific evolution in 2,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of science can happen in that amount of time, but from where they would have been starting, we're going through the Green Revolution, the Bronze Age, all in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. They definitely got help from their from man, who they fear so greatly. Heston says it. They were here before you, and they were better than you are. Technologically speaking, I guess he was right, but the what I take away from this movie, as far as like there being a moral, is that it's kind of up to the individual, because collective morality, be you an ape or a human, is going to lead you to a road of ruin. The apes are totalitarians and the humans are dead because they killed themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's any way forward, it's to just be a conscious individual. And I say that because also knowing beyond the fourth wall that this was written by Rod Serling, and having watched every Twilight Zone episode and kind of gotten an idea for where his mind was at, I think that that's probably the message that he would have wanted to be conveyed. Like, it's up to the individual. So, don't trust yourself to these larger systems, because they will either be suicidal or murderous, or both.
Well, there you have it, folks.
Yeah.
The expert has spoken.
Oh boy. Okay. You know what? There is a great, like I said, there are at least four Twilight Zone episodes that are very, very similar to this movie. The Rip Van Winkle caper, which is about astronauts who freeze themselves in time and then wake up in the future. There is I Shot an Arrow into the Air, which is actually astronauts traveling to a distant planet, crashing, and then having to figure out where the hell they are.
Don't they disappear one by one?
No, not this.
Okay.
There's actually like a power struggle where one of them winds up shooting the other one because they're lost and abandoned. And then the final dude left winds up crossing this canyon, and he's in fucking Reno.
Yeah.
They were on Earth all along. It's the exact same twist. Probe 7, Over and Out, which is where an astronaut gets stranded on a planet. And the whole time it's this futuristic thing. But at the end, you find out that his name is Adam, and he meets this native chick and he names her Eve. And it's like this repopulation thing. It's very similar to Taylor and Nova. Yeah. And finally, People Are Alike All Over, which is an episode where, yet again, an astronaut goes to Mars, and they welcome him with open arms, and they're very impressed about this human being, and they give him a house. And at the end, it turns out that the house is actually a zoo habitat, and they've put the human being in a cage in a zoo to be watched like an animal for the Martians' own amusement. Just like, the reversal in the Planet of the Apes, where the humans are caged beings for the amusement and experiment of the apes. And what's funny about that particular episode is the guy who actually is the human in it is played by Roddy McDowell, who is Cornelius in the Planet of the Apes movie.
So it's never far from the source.
Right, exactly.
Right on. Well, I had a lot of fun today, bud. Hopefully we get to do some more of these. We'll have to come up with a fun list. But,
yes.
Hopefully people out there enjoy the conversation, enjoy kind of where we're going with it, and have a good one.
Yeah, thanks for doing this with me, man. I had a great time.